Welcome to the Sens Spotlight podcast brought to you by the Sick Podcast Network. And before we get started, bet the beauties with Betway and scan the QR code on the screen or click in the link in the details section to create an account and download the app. Must be 19 plus. Please play responsibly. Betway is an official sponsor of your Ottawa Senators. Also, please don't forget to hit like and subscribe. That really helps out the show. And finally, to end all of the information, we are giving away a Dylan Cousins jersey thanks to Betway. All you have to do is following us on X and Instagram, and do the same for Betway. Share the giveaway post and comment sick. The winner will be announced on November 7th. Today we have a really big guest and a special guest. We are joined by the Senior Vice President of Hockey Operations for the Ottawa Senators, Dave Poulin. So I'm sure it will be a fun show, and really excited to chat with Dave. Hit it.
Turn up your volume. Because you're about to listen to the Sick Podcast. Sens Spotlight.
Here's Alfredson burst of speed, gets a shot away, score! Daniel Alfredson ends the game in overtime and sends the Ottawa Senators to the Stanley Cup Final for the first time in franchise history.
The sickest Ottawa Senators podcast. It's gonna be sick.
We're joined by Dave Poulin, one of the higher-ups with the Ottawa Senators. Thanks so much for taking the time and doing this, Dave. We really appreciate it. How's Ottawa treating you the past couple of years?
It's been great, Alex. It's really been a great transition for me. Thank you for having me today. And higher ups, that's a fancy title. When I talk to kids groups and school groups, I have this big fancy title, but I don't use higher ups. So
I didn't want to say vice president twice, so I had to use another term.
This depends what the day is to what my title is.
I guess for you, like what you've done a lot in your career. You've been in front offices, you've been on TV, you've done a lot of things. What has this kind of role been like for you, and how challenging and how rewarding has it been at the same time?
I think it really encompasses everything I've done. So I was a player. I understand that role. I was a coach for 10 years, albeit at the NCAA level at the University of Notre Dame. I was an administrator there for a couple of years, then with the Leafs for 5 years, both in the NHL and the American Hockey League. And I'm more immersed in the American Hockey League this year than I've been previously in Ottawa with Matt Turek down there now. And so it really is a little bit of everything. It's the best analogy I heard was one of my co-workers here called me a high school principal. That you don't finish anything, but you're involved in everything. And so I think that's probably a good way to put it. Not just a hall monitor, but really, I try and act as a liaison for Cyril Leader in the business aspects and HR and finance and corporate and those types of things. But the ultimate responsibility is to support Steve Staios in his role. And so my title would actually be arguably sandwiched between his two roles of president and general manager. And it's really to support him in every way possible and, to put this hockey club where we think it can be in the National Hockey League.
How much of your role, I know you've spoken about this on other shows, is trying to kind of get the groundwork going in terms of talking to other teams throughout the entire season, obviously to try to make trades at the trade deadline or try to make moves in free agency. Like, how much is your job kind of 24/7 in communication with other teams?
I know a lot of people in the industry, but we have pretty clear lines of communication here as well. And sometimes you can get muddied if too much conversation is going on. Rob DeMaio is in the buildings. He's the director of player personnel and the head pro scout. And so from a standpoint of being in the buildings and seeing everybody, he's that guy. Obviously I'm with the team quite often, so you'll see the teams we're playing when we travel. But it's really keeping a pulse on what's going on in the league. I watch a lot of hockey, and you're watching what goes on, and you're really, everything that happens within a game, the best way for me to describe it is, how does that affect the Ottawa Senators? Somebody gets hurt in a Pittsburgh, San Jose game. Is there any impact possible on the Ottawa Senators? Positionally, financially, contract-wise, how many years someone has left, all those different things. you sort of rotate through. I spend a lot of time on math, a lot of time on, our financial website to really try and understand. It's a huge part of it. Like the salary cap has to be balanced every day at 5:00, as you know, and it's a huge part of it. And albeit with a little more room this year for everybody, but it's still a factor. And when you're watching the game, I'm watching to see if the game I'm watching affects the Ottawa Senators in any manner.
You've talked about accelerated process a lot with this team, and I'm curious for you, like Steve Stais obviously has the moniker Steady Steve, right? What's that line between trying to be patient but also trying to make moves to improve the team? Like what's that almost line of demarcation for you guys?
Don't confuse the title steady with not exploring. And we explore to the nth degree every single day. So while we're very pointed and calculated in the moves we make, that doesn't mean we're not looking at a whole bunch of different things. And you assess it. You're assessing your hockey team constantly, and then you're saying, okay, we're going to improve this hockey team. Is it going to improve by individuals getting better? Is it going to improve by line mates getting better? And take a significant injury like Brady Tkachuk, to lose a player like that from your lineup. Think of how it affects all the different lines. And you may come up with a combination in Brady's absence that serves very well when Brady comes back. Or you may say Brady plugs in here. It moves everybody slightly differently in terms of the role, in terms of where they are in the lineup. So, we look at it from a standpoint of some guys have really stepped up when Brady's been out. And the key is when he comes back that they maintain that level of play and that Brady complements others coming back to get their various step-ups.
I'm always curious from like in higher ups or more likely the better way to phrase it is hockey operations, is that almost that trying to build the team but also trying to work with the coach, right? Because if you give them a certain player, he might use them a different way. Like how much conversations do you have with Travis Green? Maybe not in specifically, hey, we're trying to get this player, make this move, but just trying to keep him in the loop when you try to make a trade, or like the Zetterland or Dylan Cousins moves, for example. Like how much conversations do you have between the coach?
Yeah, conversation is constant. It's absolutely constant. The open lines of communication, those conversations, even Travis, are absolutely in line with how we want to build this hockey team. And there's ebbs and flows to that too, because we may acquire a player and at first he may not do exactly what we thought he could do in acquiring him, and it may be finding a little bit different slot for him, a little bit different place for him. But that the point you're talking about, I think, is the most important part, and that the general manager and the coach are on the same wavelength in terms of how we're building this hockey team, how he's employing the players, how he's using the players within the game.
Do you guys ever joke about like you, Stais, Green all played or worked for the Leafs and now you're on the other side of the Battle of Ontario? Like, does that ever come up and say, hey, we're finally on the right side of this rivalry?
Yeah, it is kind of funny. I mean, you think about that, and you have alliances with different teams, but those are long ago alliances, long ago. And, when I looked at coming back into the NHL, for me, it was about people, and that was Michael Andlauer and Steve Stais. But it was also about the organization in Ottawa and the city of Ottawa and the people of Ottawa. And I was here quite a bit as a child in summers I spent here. And so, was pretty familiar with it, but I'm enjoying it even more than I thought I would. And being in Toronto, you're in a big city, and it's very, very different. And this is more comfortable, if you will, in terms of the community.
I know that it feels like in the NHL, like everyone kind of knows everyone. And I was doing some research before the show, and I found out that you and Michael Andlauer used to be on a AHL committee. Is that correct? Like, what have you seen from him just as an owner, being around him the past couple of years, and how important is it when an owner invests in the hockey club, and as he has, as the team's spending to the salary cap and behind the scenes they're spending as well?
Well, Michael is a very passionate person and a very successful person in the business world and in various businesses as well, not just the one. And his passion comes out. I first met Michael in 2010, and I had just taken over the Toronto Marlies on the AHL side. So I'd been with the Leafs for a year on the NHL side, but had just taken over. And he said to me, "You guys have to get better." He said, you're not spending enough time with your American Hockey League team. When you come into our building in Hamilton, we should be full. We should be absolutely full. You've got to be better competition for us. And he was coming off a Calder Cup championship a few years before. And so when we went down to the American Hockey League meetings, pretty quickly I was put on the executive committee, which was a great group of people. The Howard Dolgans of the world from Syracuse, Mark Chipman, Michael, just a great group that Dave Andrews ran. And so you get to know, the group was 10 or 11 people. So you all do all your pre-meetings before the quarterlies, and you get to know people to a different level. So I did get Michael in a different light, and actually succeeded him as chair of the executive committee my final year there. And so, you're seeing him work closely, and you're seeing him work in the best interest of the league. Yes, he was representing the Hamilton Bulldogs, but he was also representing the American Hockey League and making decisions in the best interest. So it was a strong way for me to be able to sit in the same room with him, but not working for him, working with him towards something. And that's the same way it is now. We're all working with him.
Was that a big lure for you when you came to Ottawa, just having that connection with Michael?
It was. And I'd also worked with Steve Staios for a couple of years in Toronto. And in typical Brian Burke fashion, when Steve retired, Burke's normal mandate was that you took a year off and gave it back to your family. And Steve was insistent that he was in a really good place. His family was in Toronto, and he wanted to go to work right away. And I had met him the year before with Brian in New York when he was finishing off with the Islanders. And Berkey walked Steve into my office one day and said, "Hey, Poulin, you remember you met Steve Staios last year on the Island? So he's going to be working here now. So you guys figure it out, okay?" And he walked out. Steve and I just looked at each other, laughing, and it was just like, it was so typical Berkey. And Berkey and I had gone back a long way. He was my agent for 5 years at the start of my career. That's how far we went back. And it was typical Berkey fashion, but he knew he was going to put two people together. And we sat down laughing and figured out a role for Steve in player development, and he embraced it and excelled at it. And so that was the start of our relationship.
Before this podcast, I was just thinking, like, I need Dave Poulin's known for being a great storyteller. So I need to ask him, what are some stories that you can share? I'm not trying to kind of put you in a bad place about just the last 2 years with this team, whether it be with players or, you and Steve, or just being around the team, like anything that you can share that's like kind of noteworthy that you think Sens fans would enjoy.
That's a tough one, Alex. Stories usually come up in the context of conversation, not standalone stories. Yeah. So normally you're talking about something and something comes up. One of my favorite stories is about Brady, and I get asked about Brady a lot. And we walked in the Sensplex one day, and it was in the midst of one of those mega tournaments that they have over there. And so there were kids on every sheet, and we walked in together, and it was clear there was something in that game that was different. You didn't notice it at first, but it was different sizes of people, and it was a special needs game. And Brady did not break stride. He walked straight onto the bench and started hugging kids and high-fiving kids. Wow. And it was, I had just walked in with him. It wasn't my first inclination to do that. But the way he thinks and the way he is as a person, his first inclination was, how could he impact that game? And some of the kids, I'm sure, didn't even know who he was, but all the parents knew who he was. And then he went to the other bench and did the same thing. And he probably spent his first 10 minutes in the arena hugging kids and telling them how great they were and watching them play. And you're thinking, we know we have a special player, but I learn every day what a special person we have as well. And so it just struck me, that's a story I would tell about the Ottawa Senators and the way we led and the way we are and the way we focus on people. And we were fortunate and blessed to have one of the best possible leading the team when we arrived.
What's your perspective on that? Like, when you see that happen as a guy that used to be a captain in the NHL, and how maybe, shocking or surprising, or however you want to describe it, is it to see a captain of an NHL team do something like that?
Well, the fact that it's innate and it's that quick, like, most people would think about it maybe after the fact, or maybe, once again, I was a captain in the NHL, and, it wasn't my first thought or inclination. And so I think that's the important thing. No one's telling him to be him. He is himself. And that's great. And don't forget, I coached 19 to 23-year-olds in college for 10 years. So I was around the age group of a lot of our players and watched them grow. And that's the maturation part you're watching. Even in the time I've got here, the growth in Timmy Stützle is remarkable. I mean, just to watch the person. And when you're having conversations and picking up little things in conversations, you just see people grow. I mean, with the dad's trip now pending and the dad's starting to roll in. And in the first year, it was the mothers, and that last year it was dads. And I think last year there were 5 dads that I played with or against in the NHL, which is pretty interesting. And,
cool.
Yeah. And mothers likewise. The first year I played against their husbands or with their husbands. But to watch the community, the sense of community that you're trying to develop within a team, it starts at home, obviously. And we've been all about getting the right people in the right seats on this hockey team.
I feel like I'm obliged to ask you about the team on the ice so far this year. And I'm just curious, from your vantage point, you've obviously alluded to it, Brady Tkachuk's out and hopefully back in the next couple of weeks. But how would you assess how this team's figured a way out to stay afloat without him so far this season?
Well, everybody wants a little bit more. The East is incredibly tight. The Atlantic Division, it's remarkable how close it is. And you watch a night when you get help and all the Atlantic teams lose, and then you watch a night when everybody gets a point on both sides of it. You've just got to take care of business. And we're probably arguably a couple of wins away from where we'd love to be. I mean, if you tack 4 points on in the standings, and then you look at a couple of specific games, late goal, Montreal late goal against the Islanders cost you a couple of points along the way. But when the natural thing, Alex, when you come back from initial success, and I had this happen when I was a player, I had it happen when I was a coach, I had it happen when I was a manager. The natural thought process of the team is that it's going to pick up exactly where it left off. And that's not the way it is. And you do have to redefine your team and redefine the identity every single year. You don't get to pick up where you left off. That's not the way it works in this league. And, and yes, a few players changed, but you have to realize and rethink the amount of work that went in to get to where we got to last year. It doesn't happen over the summer. Summer's about individual skills. Summer's about individual conditioning. But that team aspect of it, and even early on, there'd been so much talk about 5-on-5 play, and we had to create more. And so we looked at ways to create more. Well, the way we create 5-on-5 goals is being really strong defensively. And I think that was magnified in the Washington game. And that's, to me, the most complete game we've played this year. And we were so good defensively through the neutral zone. And I talked with some of the Washington guys on the way down the elevator after the game, and they were like, we couldn't get through the neutral zone. And it wasn't about our scoring. It was that they couldn't get through the neutral zone. And they're a really good team. And so we have that. We want that every night. But that just doesn't happen. And it took a few games to kick in. I think we're back to a much better place now with that.
I guess from your vantage point, I think I've asked Steve a variation of this question, but I think it would be interesting to hear your vantage point. Is how do you, obviously take the big step last year, you make the playoffs, you're talking about how it's hard to just make the playoffs again, right? It's not an easy thing, especially with the Eastern Conference, but how do you go from a good team to where you guys want to be in terms of being a great team? Like, how do you see that process for this team, and how aggressive are you to try to make that happen?
Well, I've done it as a player, and it came through. It has to start with individuals, and that grows into the team. Individuals have to play to a higher level. And we do feel we have a number of individuals, even if you look at the timeline of when players hit their peak, what years those are, in their mid 20s and stepping up through that. You look at our roster sprinkled with 22, 23, and 24-year-olds. I feel we're just coming into it. And that individual progress will spur the team progress, because then they grow together. And in this group, from a contractual standpoint, we're in a great place where we're We're able to grow this team together for a handful of years. We don't have to worry, about specific things, and but it has to be individual to team. That's the way it's got to work.
You talk about contractual. I feel like I have to ask, just like Shane Pinto, when he's scoring at that rate to begin the year, like what's kind of going through the mind of, someone in hockey ops when a player's playing that well, but also in a contract year?
You want your players to play well. You absolutely want your players to play well. We know the talent he has. He's a bright young guy, and he had a great start to the season without a question, and scored a lot early. But we also know what a well-rounded player he is. And if he goes through games where there's zeros up on the board, we know what he brings to the table. And it's his all-around game that we're interested in. That hasn't changed at all.
Mm-hmm. With that, like the one player that, I feel like he's just elevated the past year or so is Jake Sanderson. And you talked about like a young group, 20, 23-year-olds. I think he's 23. How much kind of license of being able to improve this team around a guy when you have a guy like Jake Sanderson, who's just one of the best defensemen in the world at age 23?
Well, the beauty is that he doesn't have to do it alone. And, we've got other pieces on the back end, and think of how well Thomas Chabot has been playing, sort of co-aligned with Jake Sanderson, same position, same, similar role. But it's funny about Jake because one of my former teammates in Philadelphia, Murray Craven, coached Jake coming up as a kid. So he's got a son the same age. So he told me Jake Sanderson understood defense at 10 years old. He said the other kids had no clue what he was talking about. And he said Jake understood what he was talking about. And so, he's always elevated his play. And even when I was in the TV world and I would research what was coming in Ottawa, and at that point it was University of North Dakota, where they had stockpiled Clevin and Pinto and Sanderson, and and that group of players, and the group in the know on the college side talked about Jake in a different light. Like his skating ability, his edge work, his understanding of the game, his knowledge of the game, his professionalism is all, and those types of things, Alex, rub off on other players on the team. I mean, they watch him and they watch his success and they're like, okay, well, he's doing something a little differently. And I can guarantee you that we'll take off and we'll land in Boston and we'll go straight to the hotel. And there's a group of us that our little routine is to go to the gym when we land and get the workout in. Jake's in the gym. Jake's in the gym stretch, and there's a handful of guys there with him, but he's building his routine around what he feels and understands is going to make him the best NHL player possible. That rubs off on other players.
With your time in the NHL, like how much, like you see this kind of core of Sanderson, Stützle, Tkachuk, obviously there's other really good players on the team, but how much do you see that core is basically being a way to kind of like, how do you try to build a team around a core? Like, do you look at, Brady, he's physical. Maybe we don't need as much physicality. We have Sanderson, is a great defender. We have Timmy. Like, how does the way your star players play, how does that affect how you try to build around them as a management group?
You try and complement those skills for sure. You can't have all of one thing, and you try and complement the skills as best you can. And when the skills that we have are they're so evident, but you've got to complement them. And certain players play better with certain players, and that's hard to figure out. Sometimes that takes a test run, or and I've had situations where I didn't think I would ever fit with a player and played very well with them, and I had other people that I couldn't wait to play with, and 5 minutes into it, I was like, oh, I don't fit here. An extreme example of that, I skated on Gretzky's left wing in Canada Cup, through a portion of a practice one day, and I was like, oh, okay, well, this is not me. Like, this isn't what I do. I don't see it that way. I don't fit that way. And you think those jobs would be lucrative and easy, but they're not. And it takes a certain understanding, and that's the chess game of putting the pieces together. It's not just, it can be partly physical skills, it can be mental skills, it can be their attitude towards the game, it could be the way they see the game on the ice. And you'll see some unlikely partners and you'll say, wow, I didn't think that would be a combination. And yet they are. So that's that's the beauty of versatility. And that's something I think we have with this hockey team. And I don't think we're at the, these are our final line stage yet. And I think Travis is willing to experiment. And once again, we have a significant piece out. So you experiment in a different way with Brady out of the lineup.
I guess my question would be is like, as a management group, let's say you want to find a player for, I'm not even going to put you in a hypothetical, but you want to add a certain player and you think it will work, but how do you feel more confident that it will work, right? That you will complement this player well and vice versa. And even if like on paper, they look like they could work out well, but maybe they won't. Or like, how do you have a bit more certainty to that decision-making process?
That's the question we ask the most. And that's where we'll rely on our scouts, and not just our pro scouts, but we'll go back to the amateur level and watch the progression of a player. And, we'll talk to Donnie Boyd or George Farger, some of our veteran guys, Bobby Janicek and Danny Besser, and say, okay, so you've watched this player play and you've watched him evolve. Who did he play well with along the way? Was there a certain type of player that he succeeded with? And you go back that far and dig down that far, talk to players that he's played with, talk to coaches who've coached him. This is a small world, our hockey world, it is. And it's good and bad, because you can generally find someone to say something good about a player and something bad about a player. You've got to parse through the information and decide and see how it fits. But the key here is the Ottawa Senators culture and the Ottawa Senators hockey club, and how much the willingness is to do what we want a player to do. And there'll be players that don't fit, and we find that out. And sometimes you have to acquire a player and figure that out. And it's just like something doesn't fit. And it's hard to put a finger on, and sometimes it's hard to say it ahead of time, because it looks on paper, looks so beautiful on paper. It's not always the way it works.
I'm curious, just from you, I know you've talked about this a little bit, but just when you go into a deadline day like last year with the Dylan Cousins trade and the Fabian Zetterlund move, which was 37 seconds left, like how much are you trying to make the final decision saying, hey, we need this player, but also trying to not rush to that decision? Like, how does it all come together, and how do you feel more assured that you're making the right decision when everything's going, I'd imagine, a million miles an hour on that day?
It's no different than you taking a final exam, Alex, when you write the final answer down. You didn't just come up with the final answer right there. You've put a ton of homework into it. You've researched. You've talked to your professors. You may have studied with a study group. You get down to it. You're sitting there, and it's Steve Staios that makes the final decision. When he puts the final answer down on the page, a ton of work has gone into that. And so, and ultimately, it's the final piece is the gut instinct. There is an analytics portion. There is a scouting portion. There is an eye test portion. But ultimately, as a decision maker, the better you know your hockey team, the better you're hopeful that you know what fits. And that's why learning your own hockey team is so important. And, that's why we watch practices and watch games the way we do and study the game the way we do. If you don't know your own team, you can't make it better.
I guess with this team, right, it's still very early, but what do you need to see from this team to try to be aggressive at the deadline? Like, do you feel like you need to be in a playoff race? Do you feel like you should just be like in and around the wild card? Like, where does this team need to be for you guys to try to add to it at the deadline?
I don't think that's a finite answer. I really don't. It's where we are. I mean, we'll know where we are as a hockey team. The hockey team will tell us where we are, and they'll show us along the way. And it might be in a game that you don't think it is. It might be in a game in early December where we're down 2-0. We battle back and get a really ugly 3-2 win where the puck goes in off someone's ankle, late in the game. And you may say, okay, that's the game where we saw something different. It's not, you'd love it to be the 7-1 win in Washington, but they're not all going to be like that. They're simply not. And so there's different ways to get better and different ways to show improvement. And so we're watching every one of them. But there are times when you look at each other, and Steve and I are in the press box, and we look at each other and say, okay, this is what we were thinking. This is what we envisioned.
Was there a game last year that kind of felt like that?
I don't know a specific game. It was maybe a stretch in early December where we had a really good stretch of games in the arc, and everyone started to come together, and Lena started to get more comfortable, and he went on an impressive run. So I'm not sure that it was a game, but that group of games in early December probably pushed us in the right direction.
I'll always think of that Boston game, the crazy wild 6-5 one. Norris scored, and it just felt like, okay, they're in the mix. They're gonna, I hope, knock on wood, make it. But the last one that I've just thought about a little bit is you guys have drafted a couple of right shot defensemen in the first round, and it feels like in the NHL, and tell me if I'm wrong, it feels like the difference between size, like almost how important is size in terms of adding to a team versus skill, and maybe if they're a bit more diminutive, like what's that process like when you try to bring in guys that might be bigger but maybe not as talented per se, and playoff hockey is different, like how important is size in terms of your evaluating of players?
It's a factor, no question, but size is a funny thing because I'm 5'11" and a half, and the half is very important. And people will meet me and say, you played in a very different era. Why weren't you too small? And my answer is because I wasn't too small. It's not like I was never viewed in my game. I don't think anyone ever commented on my size. I'm just a player who played. And, and I also played for some of the biggest and toughest teams in the history of the game, right? I played for the Broad Street Bullies, and I played for the Big Bad Bruins, which isn't a bad place to be. But size wasn't a factor. And it is a factor with some players, and it isn't a factor with some players. And, there are big guys who don't play big. And I was in an interview process one time, and the person being interviewed was being interviewed by NFL players. And it was a very unique situation. And in that room, there were 11 guys, and there were probably 4 offensive linemen, a couple of defensive linemen, a linebacker, big guys. And the guy being interviewed was 5'8" at best. And he stood up, and so the questions were being fired to him, and he was in a search process. And he left the room, and there was just silence because no one had ever met this person before. And he left the room, and there was just silence. And Jeff Saturday, who was a big center for the Minneapolis Colts, shook his head and said, "Some guys just play big." And it was just, it had nothing to do with playing. It was an interview. And it's always stuck in my mind. And size isn't the determining factor, but it has to be a factor. Net front, it has to be a factor. You have to have some physical presence. You have to be able to move a guy. And so it's not the sole determining factor, but we've seen in playoff series in certain parts of the game that it can be an asset.
I always think just with you guys, like Ridley Gregg, no one talks about him. He's only 5'11" or
Great name to say. Has anyone ever said, yeah, Ridley Gregg's too small? Not a chance. That's a great point.
I always think with that, like almost it's the tenacity. Maybe there's a better word to describe it, but if you have the tenacity and you're 5'11", 5'10", 6 foot, but you bring it all the time, then you can kind of, will over skill sometimes, or size sometimes prevails, right? And
you think of Brad Marchand, you think of Brendan, you think of players like that. It's never mentioned. It's never
Exactly. Dave, thanks so much for taking the time and doing this. Typically on the show, we have journalists, so I say, hey, plug wherever you're working at, but I'm going to let you plug the Sens in a way. Like, is there anything you just want to relay to Sens fans, as the season progresses and moving on to the rest of the season?
Well, the fans have been great. And I think, we all saw in the playoffs last year when the taste of what they'd experienced. And through a period of time, they were very spoiled here. And they had, teams that did that every year. And you go into other markets and they're like, we would do anything to make the playoffs, just once. Well, we're just getting started, and we're really excited about it. And the fans have been terrific, and they've been behind us. And the city of Ottawa has embraced this hockey club I think it's a very likable team, and we're building it through character. We're building it through components, and we know we're not done yet. We're not a finished product, but it's fun to watch along the way, and it's fun to watch growth. It really is. And I want people to reflect back and say, I remember Timmy Stützle win. I remember Shane Pinto win. I remember when Ridley Gregg first came in. I remember when this happened, or a young Jake Sanderson. And that's all going to compound as this gets better and better.
Well, I'm hoping you guys keep making the playoffs because that's good for our show and journalism in many ways. But I'm excited to see how this team progresses. And thanks so much for taking the time and doing this, Poulin. We really appreciate it.
Thanks, Alex.
And that's a wrap. Hope you don't miss us too much until next time. Follow the Sick Podcast Sens Spotlight on YouTube, Instagram, Facebook, Google Play, and Apple Podcasts.